I sat in my car, watching raindrops race down the windshield like tiny crystal bullets. Each one carried a reflection of the neon lights from Tyler's party venue, distorting them into streaks of color against the darkness. 2 hours late. That's what I was. 2 hours late to a party I hadn't wanted to attend in the first place. The windshield wipers slashed across the glass in rhythmic sweeps, briefly clearing my view before the rain obscured it again. Much like clarity in my marriage these days, fleeting moments of understanding followed by longer periods of confusion. My meeting in New York had been cancelled 3 days ago. But I hadn't told Jessica. I'd stayed in a hotel downtown, ordering room service and staring at the ceiling, giving myself space to think about what I'd been noticing for weeks. The late-night text messages that made her smile in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The sudden interest in perfume samples that arrived in small padded envelopes with no return address. The twice-weekly Pilates classes that always ran longer than scheduled. I turned the key, silencing the engine, and watched the party through the rain-streaked window. 4 blocks away, the club's entrance spilled golden light onto the wet sidewalk as people hurried inside, hunched against the weather. Tyler's 35th birthday celebration. An event Jessica had been talking about for weeks with unusual enthusiasm. "We should go together," she'd said last night, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "Everyone will be there." Everyone. The word hung between us like a challenge. I stepped out of the car, the cold rain immediately soaking through my jacket. I didn't bother with an umbrella. The discomfort felt appropriate somehow. Instead of approaching the main entrance, I cut through the side alley, my shoes splashing through puddles that reflected fragments of streetlights. The heavy metal door at the back of the club was propped open slightly, a security guard nodding as I slipped past him. The bass from the music hit me like a physical force, vibrating in my chest as I entered. Inside, colored lights flashed across a sea of bodies. The dance floor pulsed with movement, while around the edges, people clustered in groups, leaning close to shout conversations over the thundering music. I moved through them like a ghost, searching for the one face I both wanted and dreaded to see. The air was thick with perfume, sweat, and alcohol, a cocktail of celebration that made my head swim. I worked my way toward the bar, where the crowd thinned slightly, offering a better vantage point to scan the room. That's when I saw her. Jessica stood near the center of the dance floor, laughing with her head tilted back, throat exposed as if nothing in the world mattered. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching blue light as she moved. She wore a dress I'd never seen before, midnight blue, clinging to her body in ways that made my chest ache with both desire and suspicion. She held a drink in one hand while the other rested comfortably on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize. Tall, with carefully styled hair and a confidence in his stance that spoke of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. The way Jessica looked at him, attentive, engaged, almost hungry, was something I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I froze in place as the music shifted to something slower. Our song, or what had been our song 3 years ago when things still made sense. Jessica's fingers wrapped around the man's wrist, tugging him closer as they began to dance. His hands found her hips with practiced ease, and she leaned into him, whispering something that made him smile. They moved only 15 feet away from where I stood, yet she didn't see me. Or rather, her eyes swept past me without recognition, as if I were just another stranger in the crowd. Just another obstacle between her and what she really wanted. I turned abruptly toward the bar, slid a 20 toward the bartender without ordering, and walked away through a side corridor. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the bass, pounding in my ears as I pushed through the exit into the alley. The rain had intensified, drumming against the metal dumpsters and washing away any doubt I might have clung to. I was halfway back to my car when my phone vibrated in my pocket. 2 messages from Jessica. "Where, Mike?" I turned, watching as she burst from the club's entrance into the rain, her eyes scanning the street wildly. Her hair was getting soaked, the blue dress darkening with moisture as she turned in circles looking for me. I should have kept walking. Should have gotten in my car and driven away. Instead, I stood there in the rain, waiting for her to see me, wondering if she would bother to manufacture guilt when she did. Jessica spotted me standing in the rain and froze for a heartbeat. Even through the downpour, I could see the shift in her expression, surprise giving way to something calculated. She recovered quickly, adjusting her face into a mask of concern as she hurried toward me. "Mike." Her voice carried over the sound of rainfall. "Why did you leave? I've been looking everywhere for you." Water dripped from her hair, running in rivulets down her face. In that moment, with her makeup starting to smudge and her dress clinging to her skin, she looked almost vulnerable. Almost like the woman I'd fallen in love with. Almost. I saw that you were busy, I replied, my voice coming out calmer than I expected. Didn't want to interrupt. What are you talking about? She pushed wet hair from her face, her eyes narrowing slightly. Not with guilt, but with irritation, as if I were the one creating a problem. I was just catching up with friends. Is that what they call dancing with your hands all over each other now? Catching up. Rain drummed against the parked cars around us, creating a strange sense of privacy in the open street. Jessica crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. You're being ridiculous, she said. That was Aaron. You've met him before at Lacey's birthday thing last summer. He works in marketing. Aaron, I repeated, letting the name sink in. Funny, I don't remember him keeping his hands on your hips at Lacey's party. Oh my God, Mike. We were dancing. That's what people do at parties, they dance, they have fun. She threw her hands up. You would know that if you ever showed up to one before it was practically over. A taxi drove by slowly, its headlights briefly illuminating her face. There was no shame there, no hint of being caught. Instead, I saw annoyance, as if my presence had interrupted something important rather than saved her from embarrassment. I came back early from my trip to surprise you, I said quietly. Guess I succeeded. What's that supposed to mean? She stepped closer, rain no longer her concern. Are you accusing me of something? Because if you are, just say it instead of this passive-aggressive bullshit. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she wasn't going to admit to anything. Not here, not now. Maybe not ever. The woman standing before me had already constructed her defense, her explanation, her reality where she had done nothing wrong. And in that moment, I wondered how many other versions of the truth she had created over the months I hadn't been paying attention. Let's go home, I said finally. We're both getting soaked. She stared at me for a long moment, clearly searching for what I knew, what I'd seen, what I might say next. When I offered nothing more, she nodded curtly and followed me to the car. The interior smelled of her perfume as we sat in silence. I turned the key, set the heater to its lowest setting, and watched the windshield wipers push away the rain. Neither of us spoke as I pulled away from the curb. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, streetlights reflecting in puddles like small moons scattered across the asphalt. I could feel Jessica watching me from the passenger seat, composing her next lines, calculating her next move. She'd always been good at that, reading a room, adjusting her approach, finding the right words to get what she wanted. It was what made her exceptional at her PR job. It was what had attracted me to her initially, her quick wit, her adaptability, her confidence. Now I wondered if I had ever really known her at all. Tyler asked about you, she said finally, her voice carefully casual. I told him you got held up at work. I nodded, not trusting myself to respond. Another lie to add to the growing collection between us. She turned to look out the window and I caught her reflection in the glass, distant, calculating, a stranger wearing my wife's face. The blue dress that I'd never seen before shimmered slightly under the passing streetlights. Had she bought it for him? Had she dressed for him tonight, knowing I wouldn't be there to see? The questions piled up like the storm clouds above us, dark and threatening. But I held them back, knowing that once I started asking, everything would change. And despite what I'd witnessed tonight, some part of me wasn't ready for that, wasn't ready to hear her admit what I already knew in my heart to be true. We drove the rest of the way in silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the wipers and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. The storm was moving on, but the one between us was just beginning. As I pulled into our driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically, illuminating the home we'd built together. It looked exactly the same as when I'd left this morning, yet everything had changed. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, rain drumming on the roof, wondering what would happen when we stepped inside. The house felt different when we stepped inside, colder somehow despite the heat running. Jessica moved with purpose, dropping her rain-soaked purse on the entryway table and heading straight for the kitchen without removing her wet shoes. I followed her, watching as she filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove with mechanical precision. This woman moving through our kitchen was a stranger to me. The familiar gestures, the way she reached for the cabinet where we kept the mugs, how she checked the temperature gauge on the kettle twice, were performed by someone who looked like my wife but felt nothing like her. Jessica didn't ask if I wanted tea. She simply pulled down 2 mugs, dropping a tea bag in each. Earlier in our marriage she would have turned to me, smiled, asked what kind I wanted. Now she moved as if I were a house guest she was obligated to serve. Sugar and lemon, right? She said, not looking at me as she prepared her own cup. And honey, I replied, watching her closely. She nodded absently, adding sugar and a slice of lemon to her cup. No honey. Jessica had always disliked honey in tea, claiming it made the drink too sweet. It was a small thing, but it underscored how far apart we'd grown. She no longer remembered or cared to remember how I took my tea. When the kettle whistled, she poured water into both mugs and brought them to the dining table, setting mine across from where she took a seat. I noticed how she tucked one leg beneath her, making herself smaller, more vulnerable looking. I'd seen her use the same posture in arguments with colleagues when she wanted to appear non-threatening while delivering a calculated point. "We need to talk about what happened tonight," she began, wrapping her hands around her mug as if seeking warmth. "You're clearly upset and I understand why, but I think you're misinterpreting things."
Am I?
I kept my voice neutral, watching her face for any flicker of honesty.
Yes.
She met my eyes briefly before looking down at her tea. "You've been so absent lately, Mike. Physically here but mentally somewhere else. Do you have any idea how lonely that feels?"
Absent?
I repeated the word, letting its weight settle between us. "I've been working 60 hours a week to pay our mortgage. I fixed the bathroom sink last weekend. I picked up your prescription when you were too busy with your Pilates class to get it yourself." "It's not that simple," she sighed dramatically. "Marriage isn't a checklist of tasks completed. It's about connection, and we haven't had that in months." "And whose fault is that?" I asked quietly. "It's not about fault." Her voice rose slightly before she controlled it again. "It's not black and white. It's not about loyalty or disloyalty." "Then what is it about, Jessica? Because from where I'm standing it looks pretty clear." She stared into her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." I leaned forward. "Start with his name." Jessica's eyes met mine, challenging. "Aaron." "Aaron?" I repeated. "And how long have you and Aaron been just friends?" "We've had lunch a few times." She shrugged one shoulder, aiming for casual but missing by miles. "He's easy to talk to. He listens." "Unlike me?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the occasional drip from our wet clothes forming small puddles on the floor. "You've emotionally cheated," I finally said, the words burning my throat on the way out. "And that's worse than if you just slept with him. At least that could be written off as a mistake, a moment of weakness. This," I gestured between us at the invisible damage spreading like cracks through glass. "This was a choice you made every day, every time you texted him, every lunch, every laugh at his jokes that should have been shared with me." Jessica's face hardened. "You don't get to decide what's worse." "No, but I get to decide what happens next." I stood up, my tea untouched. "I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight."
Mike.
"Not tonight, Jessica. I can't do this tonight." I left her sitting there, still in her wet blue dress, and walked to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. I closed the door behind me, turning the lock with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. The room was sparsely furnished, a queen bed with plain sheets, a nightstand with a lamp, and a dresser that held old sweaters I rarely wore. I sat on the edge of the bed, not bothering to turn on the light, and stared at the wall. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I listened for Jessica's footsteps in the hall, for any sign that she might come knocking, asking to continue our conversation, offering a real explanation or, God forbid, an honest apology. But the house remained silent. In that stillness, the truth I had been avoiding settled over me like a shroud. My wife no longer loved me. Perhaps she hadn't for some time. And I, buried in work and routine, had missed all the signs until they became too obvious to ignore. The realization didn't bring the pain I expected. Instead, I felt a hollow sort of clarity, as if I'd finally solved a puzzle that had been frustrating me for months. The picture it revealed wasn't what I had hoped for, but at least now I could see it clearly. Morning arrived with painful brightness. I woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen, cabinets opening and closing, the coffee grinder's familiar buzz, music playing softly. For a disorienting moment, I thought perhaps last night had been a nightmare. Then I felt the stiffness in my back from the guest room mattress, and reality came flooding back. I lay there listening as Jessica moved through her morning routine as if nothing had happened. The indie playlist she always streamed during weekend mornings filled the house with acoustic guitars and wistful vocals. I could hear her humming along, the occasional clink of a knife against a cutting board suggesting she was preparing breakfast, probably slicing fruit for her yogurt the way she did every Saturday. The normalcy was surreal. Infuriating. I showered and dressed quickly, not bothering to style my hair or shave. When I emerged from the guest room, Jessica glanced up from the kitchen island where she was indeed cutting strawberries into perfect quarters. "Morning," she said with a small smile. Coffee's fresh. I walked past her without responding, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and left. Her voice followed me, Mike? But I closed the door on whatever explanation or excuse she had prepared overnight. The morning air was cool and damp from last night's rain, the sky a clear, mocking blue. I drove aimlessly at first, then found myself heading toward Daniel's apartment. Daniel had been at Tyler's party. He might have seen something I missed. He answered the door in sweatpants and a faded college t-shirt, looking hungover but alert enough to recognize something was wrong.
Shit, man.
You look worse than I feel, he said, stepping aside to let me in.
Coffee? Yeah.
Thanks. I sank onto his couch while he shuffled to the kitchen. Sorry to drop by unannounced. No worries. He returned with 2 mugs, handing me one. What's up? I took a sip, gathering my thoughts. You were at Tyler's party last night? Daniel nodded. Till about 1. Good turnout. Did you see Jessica there? Something flickered across his face. Recognition, then discomfort.
Yeah, she was there.
I said hi early on, but she was... He trailed off, studying me. She was what? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. Look, man, I don't want to get in the middle of anything. You're already in the middle. I need to know what you saw. He set his mug down, resignation settling over his features. She spent most of the night with some guy. Tall, designer watch, perfectly styled hair that probably cost more than my monthly rent.
Aaron? I supplied. Maybe.
I didn't catch his name. Daniel hesitated. They were pretty friendly. She was wrapped around him like he was a life raft and the room was flooding. The image hit me like a physical blow. Define wrapped around. Daniel looked pained.
Mike.
I need to know. She was kissing his neck, his ear. Whispering stuff. His hand was on her thigh most of the night. Each detail landed like a separate punch. I'd suspected, of course, had seen enough myself to know something was happening. But hearing it confirmed, learning that it had been happening right in front of our friends, made it suddenly horrifyingly real. Thanks, I managed to say, though my mouth felt dry. I appreciate the honesty. I'm sorry, man. I should have said something earlier, but I thought maybe you guys had an arrangement or something. He looked genuinely distressed. Are you okay? No, I admitted. But I will be. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I would say, how I would confront her with this new information. The house was quiet when I entered, but Jessica appeared in the hallway almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Where did you go? She asked, voice carefully neutral. I was worried. I talked to Daniel. Her expression changed subtly, a slight widening of the eyes, a quick press of her lips. About? About what he saw last night. About you and Aaron. Jessica's posture shifted, defensive now. And what exactly did Daniel say? That you were all over each other. Kissing his neck, whispering in his ear. His hand on your thigh. That's not, she began, then stopped herself. He's exaggerating.
Is he?
Because what he described matches exactly what I saw. She crossed her arms. Yes, I was flirting. I'd had a few drinks. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I repeated incredulously. You were publicly groping another man at a party where all our friends could see. You're making it sound worse than it was. Then how bad was it, Jessica? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty fucking terrible. She flinched at my tone but didn't back down. You don't understand what it's been like for me. You're never really here. Even when you're physically present, you're thinking about work or sports or whatever else occupies your mind. Do you have any idea how lonely that is? So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to cheat? It wasn't just the dancing, she admitted quietly, her eyes dropping to the floor. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. How long? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer immediately, and that silence told me everything. It's not what you think, she finally said. It's not about Aaron. It's about me, about what I was missing. I laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor.
Right.
The it's not you, it's me defense.
Mike.
No. I cut her off, suddenly bone-tired of her excuses. I don't want to hear any more. Not right now. I walked past her to our bedroom and began opening drawers, mentally cataloging what I would need to pack, what could be left behind. Behind me, Jessica stood in the doorway, watching silently as I began to dismantle our life together, one folded shirt at a time. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in the guest room bed, replaying Jessica's words, dissecting each syllable for hidden meanings or slivers of truth. The digital clock on the nightstand cast an eerie blue glow across the room, the numbers changing with excruciating slowness. 3:15. 3:27. 3:42. At 3:42 a thought occurred to me. Jessica had always been careful with her phone, password protected, always face down when not in use. But her laptop was different. She used it primarily for work, keeping it in our home office. She had mentioned once having a secondary email address for personal correspondence, something about not wanting to mix work and personal life. I slipped out of bed, careful to avoid the creaking floorboard near the door. The house was silent as I padded down the hallway to the office. Jessica's laptop sat closed on the desk, charging. I knew her work password. She'd given it to me months ago when I needed to print something for her while she was on a call. But that wouldn't help with personal accounts. I tried to remember the email address she'd mentioned. Something with her maiden name, White. Jess.White? J. White. I opened the laptop, the screen illuminating my face with harsh white light. The login screen appeared, and I entered her work password. To my surprise it worked. Perhaps she hadn't bothered changing it after telling me. Or perhaps she never thought I'd look. I opened the browser and checked the saved accounts. There it was, jess.white8@gmail.com. I clicked on it and the password field appeared. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. This felt like a violation, a crossing of boundaries we'd established early in our relationship. Then I remembered her wrapped around Aaron, whispering in his ear. I tried a few combinations of her usual passwords without success. Then I remembered our first cat, a gray tabby named Merlin that had died 2 years into our marriage. Jessica had been devastated. She often used variations of his name for passwords. Merlin 13. The email opened, revealing hundreds of messages sorted into meticulously labeled folders. One folder caught my eye immediately, A. Just that single letter, containing dozens of email threads. I opened the first one, dated 6 months ago. A casual exchange about a work conference, then quickly shifting to personal observations, inside jokes. Flirtatious undertones wrapped in plausible deniability. The next email was more explicit. Plans to meet. Suggestions of what might happen when they did. I kept reading, moving through months of correspondence. The evidence mounted with each message. Photos exchanged, plans made, Uber receipts for rides to places Jessica had never mentioned visiting. Calendar entries labeled innocuously as PT, that I now understood stood for either physical therapy, the excuse she'd given me, or more likely, private time. In one folder labeled simply Notes, I found drafts of messages to Aaron describing me as too busy playing the good husband, and doesn't realize the show's over. In another, she'd saved screenshots of text conversations where they'd laughed about things I'd said or done, mocking my obliviousness. The most recent email had been sent yesterday morning, making plans for today while I was supposed to be at a work event. I was still scrolling through their correspondence when I heard the door creak behind me. Jessica stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes widening as she registered what I was doing. "Mike," she said, her voice oddly flat. "What are you doing?" I turned the screen toward her. Learning the truth. She didn't deny it. Didn't try to explain or justify. She simply walked into the room and sat on the small love seat opposite the desk. "How much have you read?" "Enough." I clicked through to another folder. "Aaron seems nice. Is his wife as understanding about your relationship as you hoped I would be?" Her head snapped up. "What?" I turned the screen again, showing her an email where Aaron had mentioned having to leave early to keep Diane from asking questions. Attached was a photo of a dark-haired woman holding a toddler. "He's married," I said. "With a daughter." Jessica's face drained of color. "He said they were separated." "The email is from last week. They don't seem very separated to me." She sat in stunned silence, and I realized with a strange detachment that she hadn't known. The great betrayal in her life wasn't just her betrayal of me, but his betrayal of her as well. 6 months, I said, closing the laptop. Half a year of lies. Of coming home to me after being with him. Of making plans right under my nose. "It wasn't like that," she finally said, but the defense sounded hollow even to her. "Then what was it like, Jessica? Explain it to me. Help me understand how my wife could systematically dismantle our marriage while making me think I was the problem." "You were distant," she began, but I cut her off. "No. That excuse worked yesterday when I thought this was a recent thing, a momentary lapse. But 6 months? Hundreds of messages? Secret meetings? This wasn't a mistake, Jessica. This was a campaign." She looked down at her hands. "What are you going to do?" The question was so self-centered, so typical of the new Jessica I was discovering, that I almost laughed. "I'm going to pack a bag," I said, standing up. "And I'm going to leave this house where every room echoes with your betrayal. I don't know what comes after that, but it won't include watching you check your phone for messages from your married boyfriend." She flinched at the word boyfriend, as if the truth of what she'd done only became real when labeled. "Where will you go?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter?" I left her sitting there, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. In a way they did. The woman I had married wouldn't have done this. Or perhaps she would have, and I simply hadn't known her at all. I drove through empty streets in the pre-dawn hours, streetlights casting orange pools on wet pavement. My brother Nate lived 30 minutes outside the city in a modest ranch house with a large backyard where he tinkered with motorcycle engines on weekends. I hadn't called ahead, but as I pulled into his driveway at just past 6 in the morning, the porch light flickered on. Nate opened the door before I could knock, wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt. He took one look at my face and stepped aside. "Spare room's made up," he said simply. "Coffee?" That was Nate, direct, undemanding, practical. He didn't ask what had happened or how long I needed to stay. He just handed me a mug of black coffee and sat across from me at his kitchen table, waiting for me to speak when I was ready. "Jessica's been having an affair," I said finally, the words feeling strange in my mouth as if I were speaking about someone else's life. Nate nodded slowly. "For how long?" 6 months at least. Maybe longer. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "Guy named Aaron. He's married too." "Shit." He ran a hand through his sleep-mussed hair. "I'm sorry, Mike." We sat in companionable silence for a while. That was one thing I'd always appreciated about my brother. His ability to be present without filling the air with meaningless platitudes or questions. "You can stay as long as you need," he said eventually. "Mi casa and all that." "Thanks. I won't be in your way." "You couldn't be if you tried." He stood, stretching. "I've got a meeting at 9. Help yourself to whatever." After Nate left, I sat in his quiet kitchen, staring at my phone. 3 missed calls from Jessica, but no voicemails or texts. I wondered what she was doing now, calling Aaron to confirm what I'd told her? Making plans to see him? Or perhaps composing the story she'd tell our friends about why I'd suddenly left. On impulse, I opened our shared Google Calendar. Jessica had been meticulous about maintaining it throughout our marriage, insisting we both log everything from dentist appointments to dinner reservations. I scrolled through the coming weeks, looking for any appointments labeled PT or other suspicious entries. A notation for today caught my eye. Dossier drop, 1 p.m. Cafe Morningside. The wording seemed odd, too formal for Jessica's usual style. I switched to our shared Google Drive, searching for anything that might explain it. In a folder labeled Personal Projects, I found a password-protected document titled Fall Plan JRW. My initials and hers. I tried her standard passwords without success, then remembered the cat and number combination I'd used on her email. Merlin 13. The document opened. What I found inside turned my blood cold. It was a detailed plan for our separation and eventual divorce, broken down into phases. Phase 1. Emotional distance. Gradually reduce physical affection. Create separate social activities. Establish independent financial accounts. Document all household maintenance issues. Phase 2. Social reorientation. Introduce new friends without spouse present. Build narrative of growing apart. Secure ally network for support during separation. Begin cultivating post-marriage identity. Phase 3. Controlled exposure. Allow truth to surface organically. Avoid direct admission unless presented with evidence. Frame narrative around emotional neglect rather than infidelity. Position self as reluctant but resolved. Each phase included detailed action items, timelines, and contingency plans. One section titled Financial Considerations outlined our assets and debts with annotations about what she considered fair division. Another section labeled Narrative Management contained talking points for friends, family, and colleagues. This wasn't a spontaneous affair or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, methodical destruction of our marriage. Jessica hadn't just cheated, she'd engineered an entire exit strategy, complete with how she would manage her public image and what she would say to whom. As I scrolled through the document, I discovered another folder labeled simply Crane. Inside were audio recordings and video files, Jessica's video diary of the affair. I opened one at random, my wife's face filling the screen as she spoke directly to the camera. "I don't feel guilty exactly," she was saying, mascara perfect, expression thoughtful.
More like, indifferent.
That sounds terrible, doesn't it?
But it's true.
I just want out without having to be the villain. Aaron says I'm overthinking it, but he doesn't understand what it's like to be the one ending things. I closed the video feeling suddenly nauseated. The woman in that recording wasn't the Jessica I thought I knew. She was a stranger wearing my wife's face, plotting the dismantling of our life with the same efficiency she brought to her PR campaigns. Moving methodically, I began copying everything to an encrypted external drive I kept for work backups. Every email, every document, every video. If Jessica had been building a case for months, I would need my own evidence when the time came. When I finished, I found myself staring at my phone again. Not at Jessica's missed calls but at my contacts list. I scrolled to L and paused. Lena, Jessica's younger sister. We'd always gotten along well, even before Jessica and I were married. I hesitated only a moment before pressing call.
Mike.
Her voice was surprised but warm.
What's up? Everything okay?
No, I said honestly. Everything is not okay. I need to talk to you about Jessica. She did what? Lena's voice cracked with disbelief over the phone. I sat in Nate's backyard, watching cardinals flit between trees as I explained everything I'd discovered. The morning air was cool against my face, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves above me. I found a detailed breakup plan, I repeated, complete with phases, timelines, and talking points for different people in our lives. Jesus Christ, Lena muttered. That's so calculated. That's Jessica, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. Always 3 steps ahead, managing the narrative. Silence stretched between us. I could almost see Lena processing this information. Her brow furrowed the way it did when she was thinking deeply, a mannerism she shared with her sister. Mike, there's something you should know, she finally said, her voice softer now. This isn't the first time she's done this.
What do you mean?
With her ex, Brandon.
Before you. Lena sighed.
She didn't cheat exactly, but she did the same, orchestrated exit. Making him feel like he was the problem, creating distance, building a narrative for friends about why they needed to break up. My stomach tightened. Did you know she was doing this to me?
No.
Lena's response was immediate, emphatic.
God, no.
I wouldn't have kept that from you. Jessica and I, we're not as close as we used to be. She stopped confiding in me after I called her out about Brandon.
She paused. I should have warned you anyway. I'm sorry.
Not your fault, I assured her, though part of me wished she had told me. You couldn't have known she'd do it again. What will you do now? I considered the question, watching a cardinal land on the edge of Nate's birdbath. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. The bird dipped its bright red head into the water, then looked up alertly. Starting with her family. I'll back you up, Lena said firmly. Mom and Dad should hear this from both of us. After hanging up, I returned to the files I'd copied. The Crane folder contained dozens of video entries, each meticulously dated and labeled. I opened one from 3 months ago titled Recalibration. Jessica appeared on screen, sitting in her favorite reading chair in our bedroom. Aaron thinks I'm overthinking this, she was saying, tucking her hair behind her ear in that familiar gesture that once made my heart skip. He doesn't understand that I can't just be the bad guy. I need people to see that this is a mutual growing apart, not me abandoning ship. She laughed softly. He says I should just tell Mike I want out, but he doesn't get the social complications. I've built this life, this image. I can't just torch it because I'm ready for something new. I closed the video, a strange hollowness spreading through my chest. The Jessica in that video wasn't conflicted or struggling with guilt. She was annoyed by the logistics of maintaining her reputation while pursuing what she wanted. I opened another video, this one from just 2 weeks ago. I think Mike suspects something, she was saying, frowning slightly at the camera. He's been asking more questions about my Pilates classes. She made air quotes with her fingers. I might need to accelerate the timeline. Aaron thinks we should just rip off the Band-Aid, but he doesn't understand. I don't want to be the villain in this story. She sighed dramatically. The weird thing is, I don't feel guilty. I feel indifferent? Is that terrible? I just want out without having to play the role of the bad guy. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. We need to talk. Please come home. I ignored it and continued systematically working through the files. In a subfolder labeled Contingencies, I found documents outlining how she would respond to various scenarios, including one titled Evidence Confrontation. It detailed exactly how she would react if I discovered the affair. Initial denial, followed by limited admission, deflection to relationship problems, and finally positioning herself as the reluctant truth-teller who had tried to make it work. It was like reading a playbook for the conversations we'd already had. I took screenshots of key sections, organizing them into a single PDF document. Then I crafted a simple email to her parents and mine with Lena CC'd. No commentary, no accusations, just the evidence in Jessica's own words and the subject line, "Why I'm filing for divorce." My finger hovered over the send button. This would be nuclear, a complete obliteration of the careful image Jessica had constructed. But as I hesitated, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Hi Mike, this is Diane, Aaron's wife. Lena gave me your number. I think we should talk." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Aaron's wife knew. The parallel deception was unraveling from both ends. I replied, "Yes, we should." "When and where?" Her response came quickly. "Coffee shop on Main St. 2 p.m. today? I have some information you might want to see." I confirmed the meeting, then returned to my email draft. After a moment's consideration, I saved it without sending. Better to speak with Diane first, to have the complete picture before taking irreversible action. As I closed my laptop, another text from Jessica arrived. "I know you're upset, but disappearing isn't going to help anything. We need to talk like adults." The condescension in her message made something harden inside me. She still thought she was managing the situation, that I was simply reacting emotionally while she remained in control. She had no idea what was coming. The coffee shop on Main Street was busy when I arrived, filled with the midday crowd of remote workers, students, and casual meetups. I spotted Diane immediately, dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, scanning the room with alert eyes. She looked nothing like the relaxed, smiling woman from the photo in Aaron's email. This woman was wound tight, jaw clenched, fingers drumming against a manila folder on the table. "Mike?" she asked as I approached. When I nodded, she gestured to the chair across from her. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course." I sat down, unsure what to expect. "I've known about Aaron's activities for about a month now," she said without preamble, her voice steady despite the flash of pain in her eyes. "Your wife isn't the first, though she's certainly been the most significant." My stomach dropped. "There were others?" Diane's laugh was brittle. "At least 3 that I've confirmed." She slid the manila folder toward me. "Aaron isn't as careful as he thinks he is. Or maybe he wanted to get caught. I'm not sure which is worse." I opened the folder to find printed text messages, photos, receipts, a meticulously organized record of betrayal that mirrored my own collection. "He was planning to leave," Diane continued, watching me flip through the evidence. "Had it all worked out, what he'd tell our daughter, how we'd divide assets, even which friends he'd keep in the split." She shook her head. "What he didn't plan for was me finding everything before he could execute his perfect exit." "Jessica had a similar plan," I said, meeting her eyes. "Phases, talking points, the whole thing." "They deserve each other," Diane said, a flash of anger breaking through her composed exterior. "Two people so absorbed in crafting perfect narratives that they destroy the real lives around them." We spent the next hour comparing notes and filling in gaps in each other's timelines. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd imagined. Aaron and Jessica had met at a professional networking event 8 months ago, begun their affair shortly after, and spent the intervening time systematically preparing to leave their respective marriages. "What will you do now?" I asked as our meeting drew to a close. "I've already done it," Diane replied, a grim satisfaction in her tone. "I confronted Aaron last night with everything I found. He's moved out and my lawyer is drawing up divorce papers." She hesitated. "I also informed his boss about the company resources he used to conduct his affair. That's not going to go well for him." I nodded, respecting her decisiveness. "I'm still figuring out my next steps." "Whatever you decide," Diane said as we stood to leave, "remember that you didn't fail here." They did. After leaving Diane, I sat in my car and opened my email. The draft to Jessica's family was still there, waiting. I took a deep breath and pressed send before I could second-guess myself. Then I blocked Jessica's number and drove back to Nate's house. By evening, my phone was flooded with messages. Jessica's parents expressing shock and dismay. Friends calling to apologize for believing what Jessica had told them about our marriage problems. Lena texting that Jessica was in full damage control mode. Then came a string of messages from Jessica herself, sent from an email address I didn't recognize. "You had no right to share private videos with my family. You're completely misrepresenting what happened between us. This is character assassination and you know it. Call me immediately so we can discuss how to fix this mess you've created." The last one made me laugh out loud. Even now, faced with incontrovertible evidence of her deception, she was trying to shift blame, to position herself as the victim of my actions rather than the architect of her own exposure. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I opened the folder of screenshots I'd compiled and found the most damning video clip, the one where Jessica clearly stated, "I don't feel guilty, I just want out without having to be the villain." I uploaded it to my private social media account and shared it with only our closest mutual friends, adding no commentary of my own. Within an hour, Tasha, one of Jessica's oldest friends, called me. "Oh my God, Mike," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. Jessica told us you were controlling and emotionally distant. That she tried everything to make it work. That was the narrative she wanted everyone to believe," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. "I'm so sorry we believed her," Tasha continued. "Several of us have been supporting her, telling her she was brave for leaving. God, I feel like such an idiot." "You weren't supposed to see through it," I assured her. "That was the whole point." After hanging up, I received another flurry of messages from Jessica, her tone shifting from accusatory to pleading. "Please stop sharing those videos. You don't understand how this looks. Can we please talk about this like adults? I never meant to hurt you." I stared at the messages, marveling at how even now she was focused on appearances, on how things looked rather than what she had done. I typed a simple response. "Please direct all further communication through my lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." My phone buzzed again almost immediately, but I didn't check it. Instead, I walked out to Nate's backyard and sat on the wooden bench facing his small garden. The evening air was cool and fragrant with approaching autumn. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a strange sense of lightness. The truth was out, and with it, the burden of pretending had lifted from my shoulders. The mediation room felt unnaturally neutral, with its beige walls and generic watercolor prints. A space designed to drain emotion from even the most charged encounters. Jessica sat across the table, flanked by her lawyer, a sharp-featured woman in a charcoal suit who looked perpetually on the verge of interrupting. My own attorney, Marcus, sat beside me reviewing documents with practiced efficiency. Jessica had arrived precisely 7 minutes late, enough to make an entrance but not enough to seem deliberately disrespectful. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek knot, makeup subtle, wearing a cream-colored blouse that managed to suggest both professionalism and victimhood. Even now she was staging the scene, controlling optics. "Thank you all for being here," the mediator began, her voice practiced in its neutrality. "The goal today is to work toward an amicable resolution concerning the division of assets and—" "Before we begin," Jessica interjected, her voice measured and rehearsed, "I'd like to acknowledge that mistakes were made on both sides of our marriage." I caught Marcus's slight head shake warning me not to engage, but I couldn't let it pass. "Mistakes," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what we're calling a 6-month affair and a meticulously documented exit strategy?" Jessica's expression didn't falter. "I'm referring to years of emotional distance and communication failures that led us to this point." She looked down briefly, a perfect performance of reluctant truth-teller. "What happened with Aaron was a symptom, not the cause." "Interesting," I replied, keeping my voice level. "She didn't drift away," I explained to the mediator. "She grew around me like ivy on brick, present but separate, planning her departure while ensuring I took the blame." Jessica's lawyer cleared her throat. "We're not here to assign fault. New York is a no-fault divorce state. We're here to divide assets equitably and move forward." Marcus nodded. "Absolutely. Let's focus on the financial disclosures and property division." The next 2 hours dissolved into discussions of account balances, retirement funds, and who would keep which pieces of furniture. Jessica spoke only when necessary, maintaining her composed demeanor. I followed Marcus's lead, answering questions directly and avoiding emotional responses. When we took a short break, Jessica approached me by the water cooler, careful to maintain professional distance. "This doesn't have to be contentious," she said quietly. "We can give everyone a clean ending that doesn't vilify either of us." I studied her face, this woman I had once known better than anyone. "You're still trying to package this for public consumption, aren't you? Still managing the narrative." "I'm trying to be practical," she countered. "Neither of us benefits from dragging this out or making it uglier than it needs to be. The difference is I'm not afraid of ugly truths," I said. "I'm not the one who scripted contingency plans for getting caught." Something flickered behind her eyes, frustration perhaps, that her carefully constructed framework was crumbling despite her best efforts. When we finally signed the preliminary agreement dividing our assets, Jessica gathered her papers with efficient movements. "I hope you find peace, Mike," she said, an exit line clearly designed to position her as the evolved, forward-looking party. "I didn't lose my peace," I replied. "You were standing in front of it." She left without responding, her heels clicking a precise rhythm on the polished floor. 2 weeks later, Tasha called to warn me that Jessica was planning something. "She's been meeting with friends individually," Tasha explained, telling her side of the story. "Says she's going to reclaim her narrative after your smear campaign." "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure, but she mentioned something about setting the record straight publicly." I thanked Tasha and hung up, unsurprised but weary. Jessica's need to maintain her carefully curated image was relentless. The next morning I found out what she'd meant. A lengthy Facebook post appeared on her profile, detailing her journey of self-discovery and liberation from a controlling marriage. The post was masterfully constructed, never making direct accusations but implying I had been emotionally unavailable, rigid, and unwilling to grow with her. "Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that two good people can bring out the worst in each other," she wrote. "While I regret the pain caused, I refuse to apologize for finally choosing my own happiness after years of trying to make a fundamentally imbalanced relationship work." The post ended with a pointed reference to how some people keep secrets too, and how public shaming reveals more about the shamer than the shamed. Comments poured in from acquaintances and colleagues praising her bravery and authenticity, offering support for her difficult but necessary decision. I stared at the screen, a familiar numbness spreading through my chest. She was rewriting history in real time, positioning herself as both victim and hero in a story that bore little resemblance to reality. My phone rang. "Lena. Have you seen it?" she asked without preamble. "Just reading it now." "It's bullshit," she said bluntly. "Total revisionist history. Do you want me to comment?" "No," I replied, an idea forming. "But I do need a favor." Later that evening, I messaged Jessica directly. "You have 1 hour to take down that post before I publish the video diary in its entirety. Not a 10-second clip, the whole thing." Her response came quickly. "You wouldn't? That's private. So was our marriage." 1 hour, Jessica. "You're proving my point about control and punishment." I didn't respond to that. Instead, I sent her a 10-second preview, different from what I'd shared before, where she specifically mentioned constructing the narrative of our breakup and assigning roles that people will accept. 53 minutes later, the post disappeared. Shortly after, Jessica's entire profile went dark. Sometimes the only way to counter a carefully constructed lie was with the unvarnished truth, no matter how ugly it might be. The video traveled further than I had intended. What I meant as a private threat to counteract Jessica's public fabrications somehow found its way beyond our immediate circle. A week after our confrontation, Lena called to tell me that Jessica's professional colleagues had seen it. "How?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "I only sent it to her directly." "Someone in your friends list must have shared it," Lena explained. "These things never stay contained, Mike." I hadn't considered the ripple effects beyond our personal lives. Jessica worked in PR, her entire career built on crafting narratives and managing public perception. The revelation that she had meticulously planned her exit from our marriage while positioning herself as the victim struck at the core of her professional credibility. Especially given that for the past 6 months, she had been actively promoting herself as a voice for authentic living through a series of professional workshops and speaking engagements. 3 days later, my phone lit up with Jessica's number, the first direct call since I had blocked her weeks ago. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You've destroyed me," she said without preamble, her voice raw and unfamiliar. "Everything I've worked for, my reputation, my credibility, it's all gone." "I sent that video to you alone," I replied calmly. "What happened after wasn't my doing. It doesn't matter who shared it." Her composure, always so carefully maintained, had fractured completely. "You made the recording in the first place. You kept it like some twisted insurance policy." "No, Jessica. You made the recording. You documented your own betrayal like it was a project milestone. I just refuse to let you control the story anymore. Do you have any idea what this has done to me professionally?" Her voice cracked. "My clients are dropping me. My own agency has concerns about alignment with their values. Everything I've built over the last decade." "You did this to yourself," I interrupted, feeling the last of my restraint slip away. "I just stopped covering for you." The silence that followed was heavy with all the things we would never say to each other again. "I never thought you would be this vindictive," she finally said. And I never thought you would plot the end of our marriage like a marketing campaign. I guess we both had blind spots. After I hung up, I sent a simple text message. I'll sign the final papers tomorrow. After that, we never need to speak again. She didn't respond. The divorce was completed with anticlimactic efficiency. Jessica didn't appear for the final hearing, signing the documents remotely through her attorney. Just like that, after 7 years of marriage, we were legal strangers again. I expected to feel something profound in that moment, grief, perhaps, or at least the sharp sting of finality. Instead, I felt a quiet relief, like putting down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for too long. In the months that followed, I reconnected with friends I had unwittingly pushed away during my marriage, people Jessica had subtly dismissed or excluded from our lives. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to downtown, adopted a shelter dog that had been deemed too energetic for other families, and gradually reclaimed parts of myself that had been overshadowed during my years with Jessica. I slept deeper, laughed more genuinely, stopped tensing at the sound of incoming text messages. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering if Jessica had moved on with Aaron despite Diane's revelations, or if she'd found some new narrative to inhabit. But those moments grew increasingly rare as the months passed. One evening, while having drinks with Daniel, he asked if I had any regrets about how everything had unfolded. Just one, I answered honestly. I wish I'd trusted my instincts sooner. There were so many signs, but I explained them away because acknowledging them meant facing a truth I wasn't ready to see. Hindsight is always clearer, Daniel offered. It's not even about hindsight, I replied, considering my words carefully. It's about trusting the things that don't add up. When someone makes you feel invisible, they know exactly what they're doing. That was the lesson I carried forward. Jessica hadn't betrayed me because she was broken or unfulfilled or any of the other justifications she'd crafted in her videos and explanations. She'd betrayed me because it was easier than being honest, because manipulation came more naturally to her than vulnerability. The greatest deception wasn't the affair itself, but the elaborate framework built around it. The careful construction of a reality where she was the protagonist making difficult but necessary choices, and I was merely a supporting character who had failed to evolve with her narrative. In the end, she had gotten her clean exit, though not in the way she had planned. And I had gotten something unexpected, the freedom to stop performing the role she had assigned me in her story. On the 1-year anniversary of our divorce, I deleted the last of the evidence I had gathered, the videos, the emails, the screenshots that had once seemed so crucial to proving what I knew to be true. I no longer needed them. The woman in those recordings was becoming a stranger to me, a character in a story that no longer defined my life. I'm done pretending, I had told her during our last conversation. The irony was that I hadn't realized how much pretending I had been doing, ignoring red flags, accepting half-truths, contorting myself to fit into the spaces she allowed. Now, finally, I could say it with complete conviction. I was done pretending.